Good evening. We're going to call this budget work session to order. And I'm just going to turn it right over to our city administrator and our finance director.
And Michelle is coming up to the table, and Raina as well. Thank you. As we talked about the last few weeks, the department heads have been working on their budgets really all through December, all through the month of December, and getting their capital projects in and their operational budgets in. And Michelle and I and her team have been meeting with the individual departments, sort of one-on-one with their capital items and their operational items. And we just felt that it was a good kind of a stopping point to get back in front of you all and let you see where we are at this point. Go over some of the assumptions that we have included in those numbers, and what we're hoping for is to get some direction from you on some of these assumptions, on whether or not you're prioritizing them, whether you want us to try to keep them in the budget, whether it's not really the priority and it's something that you feel that can go out of the budget. The promise to you is we will present you a balanced budget by the end of March. It's just that any of the direction that you can give staff at this time could help us in that process as we're going through that during the months of February and March. So I will turn it over to Michelle and team.
So thank you. So as Valerie mentioned, we are actually really just getting started in being able to compile reports, gather overall information, and be able to come back. I think last week, as late as Friday, we finished our very last individual departmental meeting. So just to kind of take a step back and reiterate, during the month of December, all the departments enter and make their initial requests for both capital and operating budgets. At the end of December and starting into January, we do 2.5 to 3 weeks of review. We sit down and review, have an individual meeting, the city administrator, myself, finance staff, and along with the individual departments. We have meetings on their CIP, followed by meetings on their operating budget. So once that's all done, and where we were as of last week was initial deficit of $3 million. And then because we're still in meetings, we haven't really had an opportunity to come back and make all the changes that we need to. So as of today, we're coming here to sit before you. That's no longer a $3 million deficit in the general fund. It's $1.5 million. Pretty much right in line with where we projected last year we were going to be at this time. So over the next couple of weeks, we will be working to balance the general fund budget. But again, just wanted to take the opportunity to take a stopping point, give you a snapshot, let you know where we are, let you know the big assumptions that are in there right now. Not all of these assumptions will stay in place, obviously, or we wouldn't be able to come back with a balanced budget, which we will March 31st.
I think you should reiterate to the audience that these are projections. It's not that we're in the hole right now.
That's correct.
It's projections about next year.
This is a working preliminary budget.
For 2017.
Correct, for fiscal year 17.
Right.
And this, again, isn't out of the ordinary or normal. We would follow this cycle. Department, they would enter the requests. January, we would have the meetings. Starting this week and going into February, a week or two, we will take the opportunity to review, get back with departments as we need to, make adjustments to be able to produce the document throughout the month of March and provide it to you March 31 with a balanced budget. And again, this is a working budget. This is not saying this is where any of these numbers are going to be by the time we get here March 31st, but wanting to provide an overview because we have a lot of big ticket items and a lot of priorities, and we want to make sure that we're all on the same page and know where we're headed strategy-wise. So again, March 31st, the balanced budget will be back, and then April and May we'll turn the budget back over to this group here, Mayor and Council, and we'll have an opportunity to make any changes and have it approved and adopted, approved May 31st to be in effect for July 1. And again, everything that we're covering tonight is for fiscal year 17. So if you want to flip to the second page of the document, I just provided a high-level overview. So far right now in the general fund, looking at total revenues of about $41.7 million. It's just a little bit under fiscal year 16 budget amount by about $100,000. But again, it's a little misleading because in the fiscal year 16 budget, we had assumed that we would use fund balance reserve for some projects as well as Invest Hagerstown incentives. We do not currently have any of that monies included in fiscal year 17. And then moving on to overall expenses, right now, we're sitting at about 43.3 million in the fiscal year 17 budget for general fund, which is about an overall 3.5% increase over fiscal year 16 levels. So 41.7 million in revenue minus the 43.3 request in expenditures and expenses is how I get to the $1.5 million deficit right now. And again, this typically happens, and this is part of the process for January and February. On page 3, so just high level, what is included in this deficit? Where are we right now? Well, for general fund revenue, I think pretty much the priority there, over 67% of our general fund revenue is still from property tax revenue. So just want to reiterate at this point in the budget, there is no increase in property tax rates. The current tax rate is 91.3 cents per $100 of assessed value. And this 91.3 cents per 100 of assessed value, every single penny on a tax rate results in another $247,000 in revenue. Just kind of give us a picture of where we are. In these preliminary estimates, I am anticipating a slight growth in the assessed value of maybe 2.5%. And that's just looking at our historical trends. We are going to be in our third and final year of the triennial, so we will not be reassessed until December, and those rates will not be in effect until fiscal year 18. So typically in the third and final year of the triennial, things kind of smooth out. Hopefully we have some growth here and there, new projects coming on board that we anticipate that will continue.
But again, if you don't mind, it's important to note that the assessments will be made between July 1st and December. Is that correct in general? The review.
November or December by the
that's
state's Department of
That's the calendar
Assessment.
period when the values will be determined.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
I'm thinking about the real estate situation.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, so no impact to us in the current or the next fiscal year 17 budget, but that won't impact us until the next following year, fiscal year 18. Another big assumption, fund balance reserve. So right now, with the very initial request, I do not have fund balance reserve or fund balance reappropriated to use for anything. No one-time projects, no additional one-time incentives. And again, not saying that that's going to continue, but as of right now, that's where we are. Moving on to the expense side.
But there is a 700,000 fund balance reserve.
No, that's in the current.
In 16.
Okay.
In 16. But in 17, I haven't made those assumptions yet. Haven't prioritized to that level yet. Moving on to the expense side, the big areas, first and foremost, will be salaries and wages. So just a reminder that all 4 of our union groups, the collective bargaining contracts expire in June of 2016. So we do not yet know what our fiscal year 17 salary obligation is at this point. So with that understanding, looked at a starting point of just an overall 1.5% enhancement. And I use the word enhancement here. It is not a COLA. It is not a step. It is not a stipend. It is merely a starting point for us to start to move forward in this budget. So the breakdown of that 1.5% salary enhancement, what does that look like? Citywide, it's about $400,000 additional in salaries. Specifically to the general fund, it's $300,000. So for every 0.5% increase in base wages, it will approximate another $100,000 in base salaries. Hand in hand with salaries and wages go staffing. At this time, there have been no changes to staffing levels. The positions that are included have all been previously discussed and approved. I think one was discussed last week and is on the agenda for later tonight to be approved, and that's for an abatement worker. So in the general fund, excuse me, we have 331 full-time positions and 146 positions in all the other funds, for a total of 477. Total unfunded positions within the general fund is 14, and we have 11 additional unfunded positions across our enterprise funds, for a total of 25. So, hand in hand, likewise, no assumptions for any increase or changing to staffing in positions that haven't been previously discussed or approved. No assumptions at this point in a reduction or a change to any current staffing level across any area of the city. With the changes in salary, there's also some big changes in benefits. First and foremost is health insurance, and I know that CBIZ was here and did a presentation for all of us, and they gave the projections for fiscal year 17 that included a 9.9%. And in looking at building our budget and looking at how much we're already paying out for health insurance from an employer standpoint, knowing that realistically I cannot absorb a 9.9% increase within the budget, all at the mercy of the employer. So right now, the projections have a 7% increase over current year levels. And just to kind of give you an idea of what that 7% increase looks like, again, this is just in the general fund. This is not all funds. In the general fund, $3.3 million for active employees in fiscal year 17 compared to $3 million, so a $300,000 increase for the 7% change. And again, in the 9.9%, in the presentation we heard from CBIZ, the 9.9% is based on estimates of where we think our claim history is going to be. So at this point, we're hopeful that our claims will be a little less, or maybe there'll be some modifications and other changes that occur that get us to a slightly better position than a 9.9% increase. Dental insurance projections at this time include a 2% increase. Dental costs is a much lower impact than health insurance, so the increase from year to year is only $55,000 for the 2%. Last week we heard again from CBIZ, this time on another topic, and it was specifically regarding the police and fire pension. The police and fire pension, just as a reminder, is totally 100% absorbed within the general fund. We heard the recommendations for a 16% increase. And the 16%, the way that that's calculated is it's 16% of salaries and wages, and that is our employer share only. They would also be looking for employees to contribute at the same 7% level as they previously had been. So in the current year, we are at 13.71% employer contribution rate. By going to 16% in the budget, the total dollars for that amounts to $1.6 million. If there is a way for us to reduce or consider reducing our employer share from 16% to 14%, again, that's a little bit higher than our current year level, it would save us about $200,000. Now, and I just want to take a step back for a moment. So I'm not saying that we don't fund, and I'm not saying that we don't fund at a higher level, but maybe one of the things that we consider is when they did their presentation, our current year 13.71%, our plan is funded in a 24-year span versus a 20-year span. So if that's the difference between a 16% and a 14%, you know, I think that's an item of consideration to place before us. State of Maryland pension. The state of Maryland sets the pension rates and actually mandates not only the employee contribution rate, but also the employer share. We were very fortunate that in fiscal year 16, it dropped to 8.53% of salaries and wages, and it remained level for fiscal year 17. They've already shared that information with us, so that is a solid number and one that we cannot adjust. And just overall reminder there that the employees within the state of Maryland pension plan also contribute at a level of 7% of their salaries and wages, which is a mandated. CIP projects, our capital improvement projects. They're always one of the larger topics in an area where often we use the phrase or the terminology pay-go, just meaning that there's many of our projects in which we give ongoing general fund transfers. We move monies from our regular general fund over into a separate fund to better monitor and track all the capital expenditures. When we actually started the process, we were at 1.6 million, and we have at this point reduced it to 1 million. The 1 million that is left in our current 1.5 million working deficit includes about 550,000 for vehicles, and that's vehicles across all the departments, some public safety, radios and equipment, facility maintenance of city-owned buildings, and some matching funds for multiple grant projects across the parks. And there's some other minor infrastructure-related projects that also are consistent and make up this $1 million. Additionally, in the capital improvement projects, we've had to take a step back and take a look. There were many within our current fiscal year 16 budget, project-wise, that was to be funded with bond financing. Right now, we are not anticipating that we're going to do that we would wait until 2017 to do another GO bond issue. And in looking at doing that, right now, based on the requests that we have accumulated, it would cover whatever projects weren't done in 16 and eat up bond financing, and moving that out and including what's requested for 17. We're looking at about preliminary estimates of 6.6 million. And if we move forward with a bond issue in 2017, I just want to remind people, we're not actually paying back 6.6 million. The overall impact of that on the general fund for 2017 would be maybe 75,000. And that's because timing-wise, realistically, for the fiscal year, we would probably be looking at one interest payment instead of two interest payments plus the principal. But then in future years, the annual debt service on that would be approximately 486,000. Again, this is preliminary and it's estimates. And the difference between the 75,000 and the 486,000 is merely the principal payment plus another interest payment in there. Of the current projects in the 6.6 preliminary, couple of the large ones, there's 1.1 million for City Park Lake dredging, fire ladder truck for 1.25 million, and maintaining and keeping in our downtown redevelopment project for 1.5 million. And just a reminder, that's a project that we have placed in the budget the last several years at the discretion of mayor and council should a project arise that we could utilize that for. Last, within the capital projects, one of the things that we've looked at doing, there are several projects right now that are already funded, and in an effort to help us get through not only just this year but the remainder of 17, we're kind of deferring those projects and changing the extent of those projects so that we can carry over about $500,000, still do a project, still complete a project, but just timing wise delaying it a little bit and changing the extent of some of them. And those are mostly some IT related projects. We had a new one that we had included in fiscal year 16 that was called Public Art. And then HPD, there's some ongoing items that we do at the building, and they've looked at and been gracious enough to go ahead and try to defer some of that into 17 so we don't have to fund all of it again in 17. Any questions so far? I'm almost through the general fund, and then I'll stop for a couple minutes. I think the other big thing to note is at this time, no assumptions, no changes included for anything, any city service. So not touching the level of our service or the types of services that we're doing. We've made no changes to the amount that we're doing for special events. That's all at the fiscal year 16 level. Same for recreation programs and recreation in general, public safety, public works, even a golf course. Just a reminder, the golf course, one of the things that we do is a general fund stipend to help cover the gap there on the golf course between the revenue and expenses, and that's about $200,000, and we're looking at ways to keep that level for fiscal year 17. Another big topic would be just overall incentives. So incentives, there are some economic incentives, small dollars that we have within the general fund, within economic development department. And then we have the economic redevelopment fund. It's a separate fund from the general fund, and our larger incentive programs and our bigger dollar items are all maintained and monitored there. So in fiscal year 17 right now, I'm anticipating that we're going to be able to make a transfer of $100,000 from the general fund to economic redevelopment fund, and that's mainly to continue to fund ongoing incentives like our PEP, or Partners in Economic Progress, subsidized rental assistance, sign and facade grants, and many others. This is the same level of transfer and operating money we're giving from the general fund and setting aside for these as what we're doing in fiscal year 16. Invest Hagerstown program, this was a major initiative and one in which I believe a few years ago the department came forward with this plan to do grants and give monies, both city center residency and rental, city-wide residency, as well as a commercial first third grant program. And the commercial first third grant program is a much larger grant. And this program, across all of these different incentives, was funded with 1.5 million general fund balance reserves. So we set that aside, and what has happened with those projects is, the good news and the success stories is we've been successful and people have applied and the money's obligated. We don't spend the money and we don't give the money until the projects are 100% completed. The project is evaluated to ensure all the permits and the city staff approval is in place. We receive all the detailed receipts, and then we make the reimbursement or the disbursement. So what I did was, there's a chart at the very bottom of page 14, and you'll see that really we started spending the money in fiscal year 14. And as I said, everything is obligated and projects are ongoing, and we will have that all spent by fiscal year 17.
Is the 700 to 750,000 fund balance reserve, I think is the term you're using, that we had last fall, is that included within this?
Yes,
So you've built that in, that we had?
yes.
Yeah, so that's been built in, that's what I was talking about a while ago.
Yes. And-
Right now, we have, beyond our fiscal policy, about 700 to 750,000.
And that remains about the same level.
But that's built into these assumptions in the table at the bottom of the
Yes, it
table.
is. In fiscal year 16, the only additional amount above and beyond this 1.5 that was obligated and set aside a few years ago was for 3 capital improvement projects, and I think it was no more than $120,000. So,
But-
all of this 1.5 actually came from fund balance reserve.
general fund balance reserve,
Yes.
correct.
So what that means, though, is that once we do this, we've exhausted that source.
Correct.
So,
And so what Jill and her group would tell you is, everything is already 100% obligated, but they're still receiving applications and requests ongoing. And at this time, our funding source of the general fund balance reserve of 1.5 million has already been fully obligated, so we can't overextend. One of the things in saying that staff has really been looking at is trying to identify and fund alternative sources and methods to continue on with some of these incentive programs. Because we all understand and realize, sitting here today, I don't have another 1.5 million as a director of finance that I'm going to recommend be set aside, because that would take me below a 16.7% GFOA best practices. So again, just with that knowledge, looking for other ways to try to continue these incentives. Again, they've been successful. One of the things that I just want to point out, within the Economic Redevelopment Fund, one thing that's different now than it was in fiscal year 14 is that we do hold a variety of properties, and they are all for sale. And those properties include the Massey property on Baltimore Street, 170 West Washington Street, 4353 West Washington Street, and 278 South Prospect Street. the sale of these assets or these properties could help provide funding ongoing to continue with some of these incentive programs.
Right, like a revolving fund.
Correct.
Now, I notice you have the city center residency and the citywide residency.
Yes.
Virtually zeroed out in 17. Is that because you assume the 16 money will do? or
Because
they-
the 16 money,
will carry over?
by the time we get through 16, we will have spent it all.
You'll have spent it all.
So for city center residency, one of the things that we did was by motion, we said of the 1.5, we carved it into specific programs. Only 70,000 total was set aside for that program. By the time we get to June, we will have spent all 70,000 between fiscal year 14, 15, 16.
Doesn't that have ongoing payments? Don't those programs have ongoing payments?
Those were accounted for, and that's what I'm
Okay,
saying.
they're
They've
encumbered within that, then, the future years' obligations?
Well, for that city center residency, there will be no future year, because that's it. We will have spent everything, so everything is obligated and spent, and we will have no obligations for that beyond fiscal year 16 unless we identify new funding sources. A little bit different than PEP. Some good news within the incentive and economic redevelopment. Staff recently was notified that we are getting a $50,000 state community legacy grant, and that's to fund, I think it used the word sign and facade, but also retail and restaurant incentives. As part of that, we have set aside $12,000, and that's what we included in our grant application, what we would do as a match. And I think that was one of the new incentives that was brought forward within calendar year 2015, something that we wanted to do smaller in nature to help these startup businesses. So that's all good news. So we will be able to spend $62,000 in those types of incentives with $12,000 of our own funds, but $50,000 really from the state. I know I kind of went through all these items on the general fund side rather quickly, so I just want to take a moment. So again, it's preliminary, it's our working draft, it's where we're at right now. We're at a $1.5 million deficit. I've included no assumptions for new revenue sources. I've not included anything at this point for a property tax rate increase. We're at 91.3 cents per every $100 of assessed value, and in looking at trends, hoping that we will have a slight growth in our assessed value, but again, that's already built in and reflected in the numbers that I've shared this evening. On the expense side, left some monies in for salary enhancement, at least initially, have increases in for a variety of benefits, and have made no changes to any city services, any staffing levels, or any stipends that were given to economic redevelopment for incentives, and also to the golf course fund.
I read that, let's see, 100,000 per 0.5%, and you assumed 1.5 in these numbers, right?
Right.
So that's 300,000.
So it's 300.
So almost 2 million of this is benefits.
Yes.
So out of that 2.27, 300,000 is wages, the rest is benefiting, the cost of benefits.
Right, so 300,000 is the base, the change
Just
in base
saying.
salary. And then on top of that, we would have a 7.65 that the employers put forth for FICA. It's our match. As well as we would have to, for that type of salary increase, hand in hand, the pension increase would also go up for both state of pension employee members as well as police and fire pension members. And then just overall growth in health insurance and police and fire pension based on information that we'd received from CBIZ.
For your 300,000, the benefits, the base of benefits associated with that's gonna be about
Is
100,000
small.
plus or
Correct,
minus.
is small in
So
comparison.
again, that's another 100,000, but it still makes the increase in benefits from the base just enormous. Considerably larger than the theoretical deficiency.
No, not at all. Again, looking ahead at the next 2 to 3 weeks for myself, Valerie, and Rena. She gets to help out this year, lucky Rena. We'll be working very closely and hand in hand with our department managers, and then at some point, they all say, Michelle, enough is enough, and I say, I know, and I'm really sorry. And then I wait a week, and I send them the email that says, I'm really sorry, but here's what we did in addition to what we've discussed. Because we all know and recognize that $1.5 million deficit isn't an easy or a fun decision. It's a difficult, I think in the initial budget and looking at what we're trying to do, trying to take into consideration, I've been given no direction to change anything. I've not been given direction that we wish to not do incentives or wish to reduce or look at eliminating services. So that's nothing that I am looking to do when we roll out the initial and the original. Again, salary enhancements and benefits, a good bit of that is tied up in contracts. They all expire in June, so that process and negotiations will start. Trying to think which month I'm in, but negotiations will start soon because the new contracts have to be in place by July. So there's a lot of unknowns in what goes into this 1.5%, but I just wanted to share because I know we've kind of heard where are we, status, recognize, and I think everybody here at the table recognizes this is a difficult year for us.
And I think that if there's anything of these items that we've gone through tonight, if there's any area that you all would want to concentrate on or prioritize or give us some direction on, like make sure you try to keep that in there or no, we're okay with eliminating that. That would be helpful for us at this point in time so that as we're building the budget to give you in March, we can have some of that direction already. If you're inclined to do that, that would be helpful.
And it doesn't have to be right now here tonight. You're saying if they do their homework and they're thinking about it, they can always contact
Yeah, they can,
staff
but if
and
there's
make
a,
suggestions.
suggestion tonight that would help us as well, that.
My suggestion is from the discussions that I've heard among this body for probably the last year, of which I don't necessarily am the one who always agrees with this discussion. Having said that, I think it's clear that the vast majority of this body would say one assumption you should make is that there will not be a tax increase. And I think if that is an assumption, a basic assumption that has to be made, my answer
that's
to my fellow
important.
council members would be, if that's going to be a basic assumption that we direct staff, that they're going to have to do this with no tax increase, then from my point of view, I would look at staff and say nothing is sacred at all. Because I don't know how to tell staff to look at a budget with potential decreased revenues and increased expenses
And say, keep everything the same.
and keep everything just fine as it is. And I've
Yeah,
seen,
right.
I've seen
I
elected
appreciate that.
officials play that game. And so I would say to staff, from my own perspective, that absolutely nothing is sacred if the answer is, and I think the answer is overwhelming, that there is not going to be a tax increase next year.
But at the same time, I've sounded like a broken record when things have been put before us that involve, in some cases, like, 2 staff positions and things like that. Can we afford it, given the situation? Not saying we can't. I'm
No,
just
Martin and I-
putting it out there because I don't want it to come back to where we're blamed. Oh, well, you guys approved all that stuff. We got to do it, and you're responsible for it. No, we're going along with the staff recommendations,
I concur, but
saying that they can afford
I
it.
also would note that when one says that nothing should be sacred, to me, that includes a reduction in force.
Well,
And I think we need to let staff know if that is, if they're allowed to look at that as an option. I, for one, would say absolutely yes, because I don't know how else to keep everything.
I agree with nothing should be sacred. I think a recommendation that gets us there.
Mr. Munson?
I think you're absolutely right, Lou. There isn't going to be a tax increase. And yes, there are obviously going to have to be some sort of, nothing off the table. However, it'd be nice if we could have some alternatives. If you can come up with some alternatives that we can evaluate, that would be helpful to us as well. Now, I can't, looking at this thing tonight, I can't think of any alternatives, but I may, and hopefully you all can.
Any other comments or questions on the general fund?
Anything else, yeah, on general fund? Okay, thank you very much for that.
All right, I don't have a separate sheet for Community Development Block Grant Fund. The CDBG fund is, for the most part, funded with entitlement federal HUD money, and we do not yet have our information to know what that amount in entitlement is going to be for the next year. We're estimating it's going to be approximately 600,000. Just a reminder, the past several years, so we were at 660. I think 2 years ago, and then the current year is 640 some. And so we're anticipating right now it's going to be right around 600,000 and a little bit of program income there. But again, no major changes for CDBG. It's not necessarily an exercise in balancing, and there's not much that we can do with those funds. All the entitlement fund, everything that we do is tied up within that fund and that program. So it's pretty restrictive. We talked a little bit about the Economic Redevelopment Fund, and what I'm going to do now is just kind of focus on the last three funds this evening is on the utility side, on electric, water, and wastewater. Again, these are enterprise funds. They are business type. They are self-supporting. They do not get money from the general fund, but all three of these funds do contribute to the general fund revenue dollars. They contribute in the way of pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes, and they contribute in the form of an administrative allocation. And their contribution and their revenue of the 41 million is a little under 4, so almost 10% of our general fund revenue dollars is coming in the form of a variety of charges, if you will, that we are passing along to our enterprise fund staff. Just high-level electric fund, I think the big thing for the electric fund, the big change that's coming is that our purchase power agreement, it will expire in May of 2017, and that sounds like it's a long way away, but what happens is staff is going to have to start the long and expensive process of beginning negotiations for a brand new contract. So in the fiscal year 17 budget, there's a little bit additional expenses that they have included, both from a consulting and a legal standpoint as we start to actually begin all of that work in that process. Overall revenue fairly constant for the electric fund from 16 budget to 17 budget. And that again, there's no rate increases within the electric fund at this time for fiscal year 17. Staffing, the electric fund has 35.5 positions, and 5 of those are unfunded. So we say they have 35.5, but really they're operating with 30.5. Last but not least, they have about $570,000 in CIP projects that's included, and that's again specifically within capital improvement projects. All of the funding for their projects comes from within their fund. There's no other funding sources there.
Let me ask you a question. Obviously, the production of the generation of electricity is related to fuel costs. So if we have enough, if the fuel costs stay down for a while, will that benefit us in your negotiations?
Fuel costs are down, but PJM, the operations of the generation transmission grid, they have other charges that have come about in the last few years. One's called capacity. Even though fuel charges are going down, they have a capacity charge that's leveled above it, so it's actually going to see a climbing in costs. Yeah, we expect to see an increase. Yeah, we've been working with First Energy Supply, Allegheny Energy Supply, and our current megawatt hour charge we pay will not hold for those out years, so we will see an increase at some point in time. And as Michelle said, we've already begun the process going out for an RFP for consultation services to move forward with this. We have to have it done by November of this year.
You think we'll still be at the half the national average for cost of electricity?
I think it'll be very competitive. Yeah, we're still on our residential side, it's running about 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour, where externals 10 or 10.5 cents, so we're continually at 30% below our regional competitor as it is. And it's even higher when you go down to the city. I mean, Pepco and BG&E, they're 13 and 14 cents a kilowatt hour, double of what we have, but yeah, we'll keep it competitive. As a not-for-profit, it helps us immensely.
I know you'll do a great job in those negotiations.
Nathan's here, he takes the brunt of that too. He's fast approaching my hair color.
Well, it's too bad that somehow the lower energy costs don't benefit us, but I guess the federal government has found some way around that, right?
That's correct.
I think overall in the fiscal year 17 budget, within the electric fund, it looks like we're anticipating at this point an increase of about $100,000. So that's just revenue compared to expenses. The water fund, again, in the water fund, I think for the most part, across all three of the utilities, it's pretty much operations as normal. There's no huge $13 million projects that we're bringing forth this year. No big surprises. Within the water fund, just a reminder, we did the 5-year rate study. So that rate study is in effect until June 30 of 2019. And it does include that in fiscal year 17, there's a 2% increase in inside city customers and outside city limits. So that rate increase has been projected and included in the preliminary information that we are discussing and have looked at. Overall, the water department has 54.5 positions, with 4 of those unfunded. So basically, they too are operating with 50.5 positions. And then within the water fund, there's a multiple and a variety of funding sources for their capital improvement projects. The majority of them, $3.7 million, to be funded with water fund operations. $1.1 million of their total $3.75. There's a couple with MDE loans, and that's just low interest rate money that we're able to secure through the state water quality loans of $1.3 million, and then bond financing, part of a city GO bond issue, $1.2 million. So again, overall, the capital improvement projects for the water fund are $3.7 million in our initial beginning phases of the budget. And I think as of right now, as of today, it looks like until we make any other adjustments, we're looking at a bottom line of about increase of $300,000. Again, wastewater is very similar. It's the same type of story. Operations as normal. There's not big changes there. They were part of the 5-year rate study, so the rates have been set and have been out there and published, and again, will be in effect until 2019. The increase for the water fund in fiscal year 17 is set to be 4% increase. So this will be the second year in a row of a 4% increase. And then for the final 2 years, it will be on a 2% increase, just like the water fund. Overall, as of right now where we stand with preliminary, until we make any other adjustments and tweaks, it looks like the wastewater fund will end the year with a positive $184,000 to the good. The wastewater department has 48.2 positions with 2 unfunded, so really 46.2 positions. And if you're wondering about the 0.5s and 0.2s, what happens is Mike, he may count as 1, but he may show as a 0.3 across each of his funds. So it happens that way.
Which part of you?
And water and wastewater do share lab staff as well. So there's many of that is what adds up to those prorations. And then just overall, capital improvement projects, looking at about 3.2 million for the wastewater fund, with 1.2 coming from wastewater fund operations, and a 1.7 for bond financing. And I just, with wastewater, the bond financing is part of a contract that we have with Synagro and was brought, I think, 2 years ago, year and a half ago.
Five-year plan.
And it's $1 million each year for 5 years. So just when we hear 1.7 million, that million is the second round of our Synagro projects. And then last but not least, with wastewater, we were fortunate enough to receive
Any questions on any of the funds? Go ahead, Mr. Munson.
Seems to me what we've just heard with regard to electricity, water and wastewater, is how efficiently those systems work. I think it's a very good, strong indicator of the good management over there at these three places. There's nothing we can do about the federal government taking a hit, or us taking a hit from the federal government in terms of electric prices, but hopefully if you can keep them somewhere around 30% behind the average in the rest of the state, that benefits us a lot. So these numbers are a whole lot happier numbers than they could be. So, thank you.
And I think we're very fortunate, you know, Mike's group works very hard with that 5-year cost study with the consultant. And for the most part, each of these funds are right on track with the projections we heard 2 years ago. You know, and we're saying good news like wastewater fund at this point right now, hopefully coming in March 31st, we're going to show you a budget where they're looking at, you know, having a positive bottom line. So all three funds, very healthy.
Very good.
Continue to invest in infrastructure, that program. So we would be looking at waiting to see what happens with the contract and the contract costs before we would have discussions of,
Sorry.
no, you're fine, recycling and trash rates.
Yeah, when does that contract come up?
The end of 2017.
17, gotcha.
You were correct.
Any
He
other
reminds me
questions?
often.
Well, I want to commend all of the department heads, but in particular Michelle and Valerie, for their work putting this presentation together. I know Valerie hit the ground running, getting to know the city and its operations and diving into the budget. Then, of course, we took a hit in the finance department with our budget officer leaving, and I'm sure that did not help you in this endeavor, but the team comes together
Team comes
always
together. Yes,
and,
they do. Yes.
and provides us with a good work product.
And Mayor, while Rodney's up here, I tell you, I think city staff has achieved something that, in my tenure here, I've never seen. And that is getting prompt, timely cooperation from CSX Railway.
That's amazing.
It truly is on the bicycle underpass. You know, we got everything cleared through the governmental bureaucracy, and I think even the most optimistic of us never
Right.
thought we would get an agreement from CSX this promptly, and that is reflective of staff also.
Indeed.
And that would allow a trail from City Park going along Memorial Boulevard.
The
Is what
same,
it boils down to.
which would connect to the AE trail to the
Right.
downtown.
Excellent. Any other questions on budget right now? And of course, you've heard the lines are open. If you have any suggestions, or if you want, I'm sure if you want to sit down with Michelle or Valerie to look at specific things, this would be a good time to do it. I thought maybe before we adjourn, is Eric still here? If we want to maybe get a report on all the operations.
Mayor, you know, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be more appropriate to do that at the regular meeting. I don't know if we're gonna have citizen comments on that issue or not, but I would suspect if any citizens are gonna come to comment on it, it may be good for Eric and our fire chief to give a report on what life has been like around here before then.
We can do that. Yeah, we can wait till 7 o'clock.
And the
Sure.
police, although the chief isn't feeling too,
Mentioned the election.
chief isn't feeling too well,
Yeah,
that's why I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
mention him.
Okay, then. We'll wait until the 7 o'clock hour. Anything else on, yes, sir.
Let me just ask you your thoughts about this. Before this meeting started, Lou and Mike and I were talking about an issue which is of great concern, I think, and that's the situation in Flint, Michigan with the water situation. I would appreciate it if Mike could take time and address that and hopefully reassure our constituents that that will not happen in Hagerstown, Maryland.
The lead issue that occurred in Flint, they changed the water process. They were buying from purchasing from a source, decided to produce their own water. What we do here at the city, of course, there's EPA guidelines in place for that. Lead has a guideline of 15 parts per million. We test continually through the year. We test in our residents' homes. We test at the plants. A year average for us is less than 1 part per million, so it's basically undetectable. The vast majority of lead contaminant occurs in private resident piping, specifically when water sets, it leaches out. So a resident can help themselves immensely in that by running water in older homes that have this present for lead. Copper pipe has a lead solder in it. We have some lead, brass has a lead component, so our meters, it may leach some out, but we put a corrosion inhibitor in the water also, specifically with our change to chloramination this year. So with that change, with the monitoring that we do in our customers' homes, Mike Horst takes care of that through the laboratory. We do 40 or 50 homes every year that are part of our program for that. We reach the contaminant level as a non-detect for us in lead and copper. So we're very vigilant in that testing, for our residents to understand that we're doing everything we possibly
And we
can.
get a report every year in
Well,
our
we have a
bill.
consumer
Yeah.
confidence report we send to every customer that we have.
actually read
and-
it.
And it's detailed in there. We actually
Yeah.
have 2 paragraphs specifically to lead. We have a number to call if there is concern through the EPA. They can call us at any point in time. And of course, we list the contaminant levels in there also.
I think what we saw in Michigan was just an epic failure of not only local government,
Yes, sir.
but the state government, since they were controlling
Yes, sir.
local administration, so.
Thank you for allowing us to get that. I appreciate
Thank you for
that.
making those comments. I know there is a lot of concern
Yes, sir.
among the population about that issue, and I appreciate your,
Yes, sir. Thank you all.
we all appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Anything else for the good of the cause at this time? Then we'll be adjourned and we'll reconvene at 7 PM. Thanks.